all of the above that I'm never letting get near you. But still in all, give you every advantage I found. Couldn't find a better fit for them, along with my crown. And since the baton was passed, I've been down. Cause failing's not an option, and dad is not a noun, not at all.
My message to any dad, man, first off, know that, yeah, it is a hard job, but it's the greatest job in the world. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I wouldn't change anything about it. Everything you're doing from here on out, if it didn't have purpose before, now it has purpose. It's the most important thing you'll ever do. Just be a dad.
Welcome to another episode of Dad Is Not a Noun. My name is Ishmael, changing the narrative for men of color and fatherhood, as well as changing the narrative on the things I care about. Just to give you a disclaimer, I am a little bit under the weather, so if you hear my voice kind of feel kind of choppy and it's like that, I'm a little under the weather. But the show goes on, and I'm truly honored to have this guest on. I've been recently following him on social media. He is a Venezuela-born educator and an organizer out of LA. His Instagram, his TikTok handle is "It Is Capitalist." Is it capitalism? And he's with me. He's with me today to just talk about the current situation in Venezuela. Again, I love learning new things, and so to have this guest with me to just break it down to me of the current environment of what's going on in Venezuela at this moment, and he's with me right now. Brother Danny, thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me on. Yeah, it's a pleasure. I think this is just a very important conversation to have right now in the midst of everything, and I'd love to just get the chance for your viewers to hear a perspective of Venezuela that is very rare to see within Western media. So I'm glad that you gave me this opportunity, and I love to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And we're gonna get into dismantling the propaganda that kind of influenced Western media. But before we get into that, because I'm an advocate of mental health, and one of the main questions I ask my guests who always comes into this space, because I create this is a safe space for all my guests. So the question I'm gonna pose to you is, how's your heart at this moment?
My heart is sad, but also hopeful. My heart is with the people in Venezuela, the people in the Venezuelan barrios. So with all the casualties, of course, we have to give time to them and give them time to mourn. And then on top of that, this has to be a rallying cry for all anti-imperialism across the world. So bittersweet.
Definitely. And then also, it's important to acknowledge the unalive. The Interior Ministry just reported that 100 people were unalive of the U.S. raid. One person that comes to mind is the 80-year-old woman, Rosa Gonzalez, who was unalived. So I want people to understand that when we do things like that, it in fact impacts people's lives. And so you have a grandmother, a aunt, a mother, a sister that is no longer with us because of the actions that this current administration decided to do. They didn't have to do it. It's just they decided to do it. So, Danny, before we get into the conversation, let people get to know you a little bit.
So yeah, my name is Danny. I'm a Venezuelan-born socialist and organizer out here in Los Angeles. Originally, I moved to Florida when I was about 5 or 6 because I guess to put it in short terms, my family was benefiting to a certain extent from the pre-revolution benefits. So of course they did not like that. They saw social movement coming over. We moved to Miami, where I was just subject to the most wild propaganda I've ever heard, conservative right-wing talking points that I just couldn't see outside of, I thought was the norm. Eventually, I did move to Los Angeles about 6 years ago. And yeah, through me living in Los Angeles, just a lot of current events in the world happened, such as the aggressive campaign against Gaza, what's happening right now in Venezuela, and another multitude of things that just further aided in my radicalization towards the left. And right now, I just want to make sure everyone has accurate information about Venezuela, what's going on, because when you don't know history, it tends to repeat itself. So that's a short intro as to who I am.
No. Definitely. Thank you. And I appreciate that. So let's go into it. Talk about how was the politics in Venezuela before January 3rd and after.
So before January 3rd and today, not much has changed, really. The biggest change that has happened is obviously they illegally kidnapped Maduro. But I want to emphasize this right now because the US wants people to believe that there's a power vacuum. There's something there for them to grab. But there is no power vacuum to install any US puppet of any kind. As the Constitution states, the next in line after Maduro is Delcy Rodriguez. She just became the president a couple of days ago, and she is the one in charge right now. The Bolivarian Revolution and government still stands. There is no large change in this structure, but there are people on the streets advocating for Maduro's return every single day.
And like, let's just talk about like the. Let's get into it too. I know there's been talks that um the vice president was the mole in the capture of Maduro. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, or do you feel like that's kind of again a part of that propaganda to just not acknowledge that she's in that position of power now?
Yeah, yeah. So there is that is for sure part of the propaganda that hasn't been confirmed or denied. But part of the propaganda machine right now, especially the aims that the West has, is to split the Chavista movement. So I don't know if you've seen. There's also a lot of claims that Maduro went to the U.S. prison systems and he was surprised by how many rights the people in the U.S. had. Right? It's just a big ploy to divide Chavismo because right now Chavismo is the strongest it's been in the last couple of months because you see thousands and thousands of people rallying in the streets. So a big part of this Western propaganda is to make sure that yeah, the Chavistas are divided, divide and conquer as they love to do, and that hasn't really been confirmed in terms as it hasn't really been confirmed in latest media, but Desi actually did fire a general that was supposed to be the head of security Maduro. She believed that he has a part to do in giving information to the United States. Of course, a lot of stories are still developing, but that's one big lead that's being followed right now.
Definitely, and then also just talk about the opposition party, Maria Machado, because I've heard her on different podcasts talking about if she's in that power, she would just give the resources to America, to Trump and the American corporations, but Trump kind of gave her the shove in the face, like, oh, no, the people don't trust you. So what are your thoughts on the opposition party, Machado?
Yeah, I think Maria Macorina Machado. A lot of people don't realize, but um, she is the predecessor of a long line of oil families that used to own Venezuela before the Bolivarian Revolution. Her parents and her grandfather, right? Like they were all involved in these big oil families before the revolution, and she's just a continuation of that legacy of imperialism. In 2002, actually, when the United States illegally tried to coup Venezuela, they took Chavez out of power. They put Carmona in. He set a new decree. He was setting up to start a whole dictatorship. He signed a decree called the Carmona Decree, and Maria Corina Machado, she was actually one of the signers of that decree, right? Trying to install a U.S.-backed dictatorship. And ever since then, she's been calling for violent coups, as we saw in 2014 and 2017, that led to the unaliving of hundreds of Venezuelans by the opposition party. And after a while she was barred from running like any other state would do, right? In the United States is actually even worse, right? Treason is a capital punishment. You are given the death penalty, right? So the fact that they were even able to participate in the government shows how lazy the manufactured consent is in the USA when they say, Venezuela is a country of repression, but any other state would have not allowed them to even participate in the government for that long.
And with the whole current environment that we're in, what do you think um, the election will look like down the road when you have that election coming around the corner in Venezuela?
So yeah, that's a tough one to say. I guess right now, just pushing it back to the first answer, right? There is no power vacuum. The Bolivarian government still stands. So because the last elections were last year, the next election will come in about 5 years. So much can develop in 5 years. Will the U.S. put boots on the ground? Will the U.S. install their own head? Will Delcy step down? Will something happen, right? There's a lot in the air right now. But what we do know is that the Venezuelan government is trying everything that they can to de-escalate this, and the People's Army is ready to defend Venezuela if anything does come down to it. But in terms of the next presidential election in 5 years, it's hard to tell. It is.
And what are your thoughts about the U.S. Legal U.S. departments cited the legal justifications of detaining Maduro? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean it's an obvious sham. It's obviously an attempt to manufacture consent. As we saw, they even dropped one of the charges a couple of days ago. The one that he was the head of the Cartel de los Soles, right? The group that they were calling a violent organization. And since the 90s, we've known that it's funny, right? Because in the 90s, the U.S. had an operation to transport product from Colombia into Venezuela and then into the United States, right? Because Venezuela had a dictatorship, but they were selling the U.S. oil. So the U.S. didn't care about that, right? The U.S. never cares about that. So this operation, right, was eventually had a group that was eventually coined Cartel de los Soles. This was never brought about. This was never made an issue until the Chavez and Maduro era. They're like, wait, doesn't Cartel de los Soles exist? The CIA group made built in the 90s. So obviously that was going to be the first one dropped. There's never been evidence of that. But as time goes by, you're going to see that the next ones are going to drop as well because there's no evidence behind what the U.S. has to say.
And can you add the race dynamic to Venezuela? From what I've learned from the history of Venezuela, is there is a race dynamic between black and brown, and then also Venezuela that look at themselves as European. Can you add that dynamic to this current environment?
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very evident. If we want to talk about race relations, recently, for example, it's so sad because usually usually like the brown and black populations of Venezuela that are living in the barrios in the lower income villages and towns, they love the government because the government provides them with medicine. It provides them with unused private land that governments don't or that companies don't use. They can use it for their community projects, right? They can own a home. They have a dignified life, things that they can't do here. So it's very like, for example, in the 2014 protests against the government, when you saw the main people that were protesting were rich, white, affluent European immigrants that want to make Venezuela their own, or their children from European immigrants, and you saw them there protesting with their little Gucci bags and their nice clothes, protesting the government just because the government was expropriating private land and giving it to the indigenous population, giving it to the farmers that were neglected before. And yeah, in 2014 even we saw a huge, it was so sad. It was a wave of attempted, well, it wasn't attempted, they actually succeeded, of burnings towards black and brown Chavistas that were protesting on the streets. Not only burnings, but other kinds of, just vile ways of unaliving people that I don't want to mention, but I highly advise people to look up. It's been a long racial divide for sure.
Yeah, because I think it's important too. Because the one thing you were talking about, how Hugo Chavez got in power, was because of that, not the movement of the disenfranchised group, black and brown in Venezuela, was the reason why Chavez came into power. If you want to kind of dive into that, because a lot of people think Chavez just came out of nowhere and he was this dictator. It's more to the history that a lot of people don't know about. The underclass of Venezuela got tired of like being second class citizens in their own country.
Yeah, of course. I think unfortunately Western media views Venezuela as a state that began when Hugo Chavez was elected, but they don't realize Venezuela has a long and complex history. Um, I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question?
No. That's okay. No, I wanted you because I know one of the things you posted, how people think that Hugo Chavez just came out of the blue, this alleged dictatorship, but they don't realize the revolution for the underclass people were stirring for decades. Like they got tired of being the second class citizens of a country. If you go to the history of the revolution of Venezuela and its independence, black and brown people played a role in it. And unfortunately, if you look into the history of Venezuela, they try to erase that story. Like I know, like a long time ago, they did a census of do you when they asked that question, how many Afro Venezuelans in the country, it was like 0.3%, which doesn't make sense because you know if you look at the data, I think it was like like almost 2.8 or 3 million of of Afro Venezuelans are in the country. So can you kind of talk about that revolution that's been there since its independence, and how Hugo Chavez didn't just show up just out of the blue? It was that revolution started from that independence to put him in that position that he was in that position.
Yeah. Great question. Great question. I love to talk about this because yeah, the U.S. usually sees Venezuela as a state that began when Chavez was elected, and that Chavez was a great man that single-handedly formed history, right? Like this is not how history happens. This is not how movements happen, right? Which is why I also say Maduro not being the president of Venezuela does not destroy any Bolivarian revolution, because like you said, it existed before Chavez and it will exist as long as imperialism exists, right? This is a resistance movement. So before the Bolivarian revolution, like you said, there was huge turmoil in Venezuela. There was two major parties, AD and COPEI, and they pretty much shared the dictatorial roles in Venezuela. In 58, they made a pact called the Punto Fijo Pact, where they were just going to share the dictatorial roles. And from 58 to 98, they just implemented aggressive austerity politics that led the working class in Venezuela extremely impoverished, right? It was just two US puppets working for the US, keeping all the oil money in offshore banks, making sure that all the workers that worked in the oil fields couldn't afford homes, couldn't even afford food. It led to such a big crisis that Venezuela had the largest income inequality in all of Latin America, right? The extreme poverty and poverty rates were through the roof. There was no representation in the elections. Almost every election was fraud, right? They're saying Maduro's elections are fraud, but if you want to look at pre-1993, there was violence at the booths. Dead people would vote for political parties in countries that didn't even have the populations that added up, right? It was a complete sham, and because of this, you saw communes and collectives built from the bottom up in the most impoverished places. Like you said, there were huge black and brown communes that came that started managing their communities on their own. They're like, the government's not going to give us power, so we're going to build the power ourselves. And through the development of that, you saw Hugo Chavez born. He was also born in the barrio, so he was born around these material conditions. He saw these communes collectivizing and helping each other out. So he saw another way that was achievable. And right, like I love to say, Hugo Chavez was a result of a movement that already happened on the ground, and then he took that movement and helped it forward, right? But he didn't start it, right? He was a result of it.
And I think that's important for people to understand, that is that any movement, everyone needs a face to, articulate it for the mass. And I want people to understand from this conversation that this movement has been going on for decades and decades. And so that's the reason I wanted to bring that up. My next question to you: what do you see um, from the United States going on? Because you get mixed messages right now. You get it from the president, you get it from Mark Rubio, you get it from Pete Hegseth, of like, what is America's long time goal? Because what I'm hearing right now is that American companies are kind of hesitant of coming back into Venezuela because of the uncertainty, and like the especially with the military and like the people in Venezuela, um, they've it's that idea of being colonized, and to me, a part of me feel like they will be like mass disruptation that's going to happen if American companies back into that goes into Venezuela. What are your thoughts of the long term? Because to me, certainly, when they did it, I don't think they had a plan. They did not have a plan. Their idea was, let's get Maduro out and we'll just figure it out from there. But what are your thoughts?
Um, yeah, yeah, like you said, it's kind of hard to see where they're going right now. A lot is up in the air, but what we can kind of say from what we see right now is that oil 100% large factor, if not the largest factor we see. Um, because believe it or not, January 3rd, the very same day that the illegal kidnapping happened, you had some of the biggest donors for the Democratic Party even going into Venezuela to potentially look at investment opportunities, right? So this isn't just Trump's war. This is a bipartisan, uh, a bipartisan effort for Citgo, for the big oil companies, right? So that they can benefit. Um, and Oh, sorry, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, like it's hard to know where it's gonna go. Kind of like the election question. But what we can see is that right now Trump kind of looks like he's willing to negotiate with Darcy, but at the end of the day, that's just smoke and mirrors. They do want the Bolivarian government gone because at the end of the day, the Bolivarian government is not going to give them oil. It's not going to let them operate inside. And who knows? Maybe Delcy does. Maybe Delcy does. I don't know. But as of now, it doesn't look like they're going to do that. These are just statements by Trump. Um, but yeah, they do want to reinstate the Monroe Doctrine, pretty much just make sure the whole Western hemisphere is under U.S. control. They want to counteract soft power that China and Russia have over Venezuela. They want to have access to the largest proven oil reserves in the world, even though they can't really filter them as well as other countries. They want
Right.
access to that, right? So it's obviously a money play um, and naked imperialism.
No, and what are the things you're seeing from conversation you have people that's there, their neighbors? Like what are they talking about? Like, when you got what is it, Colombia, and like the other countries in Latin America that the United States said, hey, if you're not with us, we're going to do the same thing that we did in Venezuela. We're going to do that to you. So, what are your feelings on the ground from people that you're talking have conversation with about the neighboring countries?
I think it's mixed feelings. Obviously, from like for example, from my perspective, I have family that lives in the barrios, and I also have family that are celebrating right now, right? Because they're wealthy and they want to return to, to funds, right? Or return to
Right.
rich, whatever. And when I talk to the ones that live in the barrios, right, we see that it's a big collective movement right now to get behind Maduro, get behind his return. And historically, Venezuela hasn't had a lot of trust in neighboring countries because, for example, Colombia has historically been an ally for the U.S., helping the U.S. interfere in Venezuela. Ecuador has historically been on the side of the U.S., right? So we haven't had much help in terms of neighboring countries. So right now the focus isn't really on will the neighboring countries help us? It's what can we do to kick imperialism out? And I think that's just part of the culture that's been instilled there for a while of having to, rely on Cuba or Iran and Russia for help because unfortunately these sanctions affect not only Venezuela but all of the trading partners of Latin America.
And then also, my last question for you on the global aspect of everything. Do you see this as a domino effect for around the world? Like you have Russia and Ukraine. You have China that always wanted Taiwan back into their grasp. What are your thoughts on the other global powers seeing this as a way of, okay, all right, if the United States doing this with no consequences, now when you talk about international laws and the following, it's like it's it's out of it's it don't exist.
Yeah, I think this is just another, right? Another long list to prove that, yeah, like you said, international law does not exist. The UN cannot be held accountable. The ICC cannot be held accountable. Um, Laws are just there to benefit the most powerful class, and the most powerful class in today's age is the capitalist class. So laws are made for the rich, and laws are made to vilify certain groups while accepting those same acts by, the US or by Western corporations. So this definitely sets a huge precedence for other countries that want to perform imperialism, such as the United States, such as England, such as Israel, to just take over land, go to sovereign countries, take over their leaders for a political idea, right? If any other country did this, it would be called an act of terror. But this is just peak American exceptionalism, right? If the US does it, it's different because we're developed, because we have democracy, right? Whatever you want to call it. But yeah, this sets a very dangerous precedent that no international law has to be followed. But unfortunately, we kind of already knew that, right?
Yeah, no, and I definitely agree with you. Um, and for people who's just following what's going on, what are the key points you want people to pay attention in the future? What are some of the dog whistles you want people to listen to in Western media and say, "Hey, this is propaganda. Don't fall for this BS."
I think just one of the big things that I implore people to always look into is just Venezuelan history, right? Like I said, if you don't know history, you're gonna tend to repeat it, or you're gonna tend to be a talking head for propagandists that want to repeat it. So I would always emphasize for people to look at why Hugo Chavez won in a landslide victory, right? Why was it that he was so supported by the people? And that's the Venezuela that the U.S. wants to bring us back to. That. So whenever you hear criticism about Chavismo or criticism about Maduro, ask yourself, who's writing this? Who does this benefit? And does this benefit any of the Venezuelans in the barrios, the lower class Venezuelans? Because right now you'll hear the rhetoric of, oh, listen to Venezuelans, but they're trying to use identity politics to stir up a divisive message, right? Because you can talk to Venezuelans that are lower class, that are upper class, and they're going to have very different points of view. So, don't just listen to Venezuelans, right? Listen to people that are speaking from their material conditions, right? That are affected by the sanctions every day, that are affected by the starvation, and that want Nicolas Maduro back in his rightful place because he was elected by the popular vote. So I think those are things that people should really focus on.
No, definitely I agree with you. And then one thing too is I know they did use a lot of AI. So again, in this world that we live in, understand and realize and do your homework when you see a video to see if it's AI or not. Just don't believe it just to believe it. There's apps out there that can debunk these videos nowadays. So be mindful of what you watch when it comes to propaganda, especially in Venezuela. Do your homework, and just be informed. What are some of the books which you highly recommend people who are newbies to to the history of Venezuela? What books should people recommend reading?
Okay, so I guess I'll recommend three different books that are three different perspectives, but maybe they can touch on whatever people want to learn on right now. First one is Extraordinary Threat by Joe Essenberger and Justin Podur. Oh, I actually had it here. Oh, here I got it actually right now.
Okay, sure.
This book really good.
Okay.
And it just pretty much is a brief overview of the Venezuela since 2000 to now. Goes over the 5 times that the U.S. has tried to coup Venezuela, and goes over and dispels some popular myths that you hear about Venezuela, such as Maduro not being legitimate or Chavismo ruining the country, stuff like that. Another book I would highly recommend is Bad News from Venezuela. This is a very short read. It can also be found online, which um, pretty much goes over the 20 years of misreporting about Venezuela in Western media, and how Western media is wrought into the very core, like the correspondents themselves sometimes go to Venezuela and don't even speak Spanish. So this is a very good book that I highly recommend. And the last one that I recommend is one by George Mayer. It's called We Created Chavez. And it kind of goes into, we kind of talked about it earlier in this interview, but it kind of goes into that concept that Chavez didn't come out of nowhere, right? He was a result of these movements happening on the ground, and that's why the material conditions led to Chavez versus Chavez creating revolution.
Definitely. All those books will be in the description below. Danny, thank you for coming on. Again, this has been a great conversation on the podcast. Like, subscribe, and all that good stuff. And we're out. Peace.
But thank you. Have a nice day.
Stay on for 1 second. Let me end the recording.